You were speaking about gaming, and that got me a question. I don't know if this question is even one that you can answer on the spot, but like, what do you think? Because I mean, that we're talking before about evolutionary traits and stuff that we develop, and gaming. And I was trying to put kind of equivalency in my head. How I see it: is it gaming? Is it art? What do you think gaming represents? Is it like to people, to human beings? Because there's so many different variations of it. There's a sharing aspect of it. There's a playing aspect of it. There's a learning to overcome challenges. There's that, kind of like that skill and that kind of technicality that you learn playing the games, which can be applied to life. Yeah, what do you think gaming? What role does gaming play? Gaming and video games play in life?
That's really interesting because I think with a book or a film, you can always say there is a creative who has a story they want to tell.
Exactly, yeah.
And if it's literature, it's literally just a story through words that they convey the meanings through, they convey environments through, and so on. Film, through not just words, but directing your actors, collaborating with your director of photography, getting the right shots, getting the lighting right.
It's curated, it's crafted, yeah.
Editing that on another level, and you need people who are good at editing, who can not only listen to the director's vision, but also have their own flair and making that work to tell this cohesive story, But with games, at least in essence for what a game is, it's really interesting because it's people that want to make a game that people like and play with. And it's not necessarily, I don't know what that is. I can't, you're right, I can't answer that. But I think it's so interesting that as an art form, which I do believe it is an art form, you're constantly just making, it's like games are simulations of life. Like even football, chess is simulations of life. So to constantly be manufacturing that and want to be driven to do that, it is really interesting. And I wouldn't know how to put words on that drive.
It's so interesting too, even like the perspective of the fact that like you could make a game but the relationship doesn't stop there. You're making a game knowing someone else is going to play it. When you make an art, they're not part of that creative process, they're just consuming it. But as a gamer, if you can't understand exactly, you're the other end of it. If you can't understand the hints or the mechanics that this person has created and like be able to build off that, and you don't have that same level of like understanding, like for example you take Elden Ring, right? I've never played Elden Ring, but I've known from people who played Elden Ring, like the level of detail and the story and how hard the game is and all these different aspects of it adds to the enjoyment or the lack of enjoyment of the game.
But Elden Ring is really interesting because, so as a game, and the studio behind Elden Ring, they've almost defined a new genre of games called Souls-like, which is just, honestly, I wouldn't even really know how to, that's a discussion in itself to describe what a Souls-like is, I think. But like Elden Ring, I don't know if you know Demon's Souls, but those kind of games, right? Like action, role-playing games that, yeah, anyway. I'm not going to try explain it here, but making a game for people to play. But the thing that these Souls-like games do is make it extremely hard, like extremely, extremely hard. And I always find it interesting that game design isn't just about making a happy experience. Not that other mediums are doing that, but perhaps the perception of video games could be that it's just playing and having fun. But there's been occasions where I'm playing a game and I'm getting frustrated and I don't want to stop. But people will say to me like, well, why are you playing it? And then that just pisses you off. Because like, you wouldn't understand why I'm giving it.
I have to do this. I have to.
Literally. And it's just so interesting that even something like that vision. Imagine we have that conversation like, who's your favorite writer? Like, I know I'm asking you this. Who's your favorite writer? Just a quick one.
Fuck.
Doesn't have to be most favorite. Just
okay,
a good writer.
Rumi. I like Rumi.
So like you could say Rumi wrote this thing because he wanted to tell this story. How weird is it to say like this guy created Elden Ring to just piss people off,
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's also one of the most rewarding experiences ever. And that's part of their vision as well. Like, it just has to be. And when I consider what it is as an art form and what it, I suppose, like conjures, let's say, what it inspires in the people that play it, it's so interesting. And I, as a medium of entertainment, like an art form as well, I genuinely just love it. And touching on what you said earlier, that when you have a game, or when you make a book, like it obviously you can interpret it, and like a film you can interpret it in a similar way, but you can't really transform it beyond the film. The film is the film. Meaning can be discussed, but typically there is a meaning. With a game, you know, it's like I make this game, I give it to you, and then it becomes your own experience, you know. Even things like people are willing to watch people play a game because their own experience of a game, from how they play, how they react to things, it's so unique to an individual that people are willing to pay, willing to watch people play, willing to pay to watch them play, you know.
Talk to stuff, but yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for noticing that. Speech ability. And you know, it's so interesting to me. I love video games, man. And just that kind of freedom it gives you. Well, you know what? I'd love to ask you this question because this is something me and Umar often talk about. I've kind of spoken about video games as just games, but at the same time, there are games that are built from the ground up to be a narrative-driven experience. And there's a bit of a joke in the industry where if there is a game less focused on gameplay and more focused on narrative, you kind of tease the director and be like, oh, they just wanted to make films, but they weren't good enough, so they're making a game instead. Yeah. Obviously, very rude tongue-in-cheek thing to say, but sometimes they are a bit half-baked, or as a concept, it just doesn't make for a fun game. And that's what I wanted to ask you about. I know you don't have a big experience of games, but what do you think about the idea that for a game to be good, what should be prioritized? Gameplay or narrative?
It's a very good question. I think for me, I'm a bit biased in it because obviously I love narratives, and I think there's so much that can be taken from narratives, and my lack of experience of gameplay, even the games I'm drawn to, is because of the narratives. You know, I talk about, you know, Red Dead. I've not played Red Dead, but I can see that, you know, just putting in that world, I feel like it would be so interesting. But I think, like, okay, I've been thinking it for both, right? So obviously for narrative, for me, it'll be about, because even though it's a narrative and you guys make fun of it, I think it's so much different from actually writing an actual narrative, an actual novel. Because I think what they're doing with the game is that they're allowing you to add to the narrative. They're allowing you to be because my mind just goes to, okay, you're basically having this character, or like a protagonist, who has a free will, and the protagonist is the gamer, and you're putting this person in this world, allowing them to make choices which affect, and obviously they know which different paths you can go, but you're allowing them to make choices which affect their enjoyment or the story, how the narrative will play out. And that to me just blows my mind. You know, that to me is such a unique way to take something that's supposed to be, you know, solid and, you know, kind of like not supposed to be, you know, because obviously narrative for me, when I read books, or when I was reading books as a kid, I was being inhabited into their world, but it was also still like, I wasn't literally in their world. I wasn't literally looking around, you know. But with games, you know, you've taken that imagination and brought it to form, and like that's that they're in that world now, and you get to make that. But then again, I don't know what the gameplay experience could be at its highest, you know, at its top highest. What that enjoyment would feel like, having played all these other games and seeing like, actually this is the best version of that. This is actually taken to the extreme form and made it really good.
You know what I'd say to you? Do you think FIFA has a narrative?
See, that's an interesting story, because FIFA's narrative is built upon the beautiful game. It's the greatest narrative ever, and it just keeps no, because literally, just think about that. Like the example we have of FIFA is such a great idea, because like the fact that we understand these people and these characters in real life is the only reason why we play that game. Because the gameplay is shit, we all know that, but it's shit enough, it's good enough they'll make us play with these characters like pawn pieces on a board to see what would happen if we were the manager, we were controlling these players. But these players are real people in real life, living across the road somewhere. But, you know, but because it has a embedded real life experience, that narrative is placed on top of this thing, and then it's kind of developed that way.
And so do you think then that's what makes a game like FIFA satisfying? It's not the mechanics of the game, it is your love for football and that kind of thing. Like if there was, it's very hard to to ask the question I was about to say. I was going to say, if there was a game like FIFA but it wasn't about football,
would I also...
Yeah, but that's a stupid question. I think maybe a better question would be something like, if you weren't so into football, do you think you would still play a game like FIFA?
Probably not, to be fair, because I know people who aren't into football and like they'll play FIFA and be like, I don't get this. These are just characters running around, and I can see why they view it like that, you know. But it's also it calls back to what I said before about the game being an experience. FIFA is the most shared experience I've ever had, because it's not even about. Now the narrative is important, but it's about me being my friend. It's about me facing my friend of his team, and he faces him. It's big. It brings form to that rivalry you have in real life, and actually makes you like, okay, go on then. Actually, have these people play with your characters and have that. So it's like there's different levels, and FIFA's such a unique example because even the gameplay might not be good, or the narrative might not be as like because the players don't even look like the real players, or like it doesn't even matter how like realistic it is. It doesn't have to be photorealism. It's just, can you give me the tools that I need? And like that to me is fascinating, you know. And I think like a question I had for you actually was about, we were mentioning it before about how because you were talking about the chess and the evolutionary traits that we have from these things and how children can learn, and I'll let you speak about that a bit more. But what do you think, taking gaming and taking these kind of things, what do you think are some of the evolutionary traits that we've learned we can take from that?
Well, I think it was Piaget that said play was little work, little sprinkle of what we learn at work. No, you know, I mean, it's been discussed in psychology for decades now, nearly centuries, of just how important play is in formulating people's personalities. And before I go too off track, what was your question, just like specifically?
So the evolutionary traits of gaming, but also like moving away from that to like
just
like
play
normal,
in general.
Yeah,
no, I kind of had this realization, because I guess that's what you want me to say specifically. I had this realization recently that again, Umar, who's been getting into chess, told me this thing that there's this hilarious thing that happens when people play chess with their children, and it's that the kids get very good at chess very quickly, because chess is all about pattern recognition and how if you notice one, what pattern should you do to correct that course and win. And children are very good at that skill when they're younger, and especially learning your patterns, you know. And I was sort of speaking on that and realizing, well, maybe not realizing, but in my opinion, the way I thought of it was, that in itself is evolutionary, because let's bring it back to caveman days. If there's a family in a cave somewhere and their child needs to go out into the wild and learn how to survive and learn how to do this thing to fight the saber-toothed tiger, or learn this different skill to make this tool to make it stronger and do this, or and that in itself is evolutionary. And I love that in modern society it's like those things that are baked into us at like a hardware level, you know, it doesn't go away. And so for a child, these things like chess that are so they're such games at their core that they're and a game is a simulation of life, you know. And so when you play chess, you're effectively just simulating life and death. If you lose, you die. If you win, you survive and you go on to the next one, and you're a better chess player for it, I suppose. And, you know, and as I was having that thought, I was like, man, so that's why children are so good at picking things up when they're kids, because they just need to learn to survive. And it's why when they are playing a game that again is a simulation of life and death, when they lose, it's why they get so angry, like
literally death for them.
And you've had young young siblings, so I'm sure you've seen like breakdowns, like mental breakdowns. And like that's interesting, because I've not had younger siblings. How have you kind of tackled children, hopefully not actually tackling them, but how have you
just run your in RKO?
Because I know you had to kind of be the male figure for your siblings as well, so like when you kind of did you have siblings that were sore losers, and if you did, like how did you tackle that?
Oh man, yes, all of them are terrible losers. Like, and I think also because I'm a terrible loser too, so I would win even when they were like little kids teach you the real world. But no, so I'm the middle child, so I've got two younger siblings. I've got one younger brother and one younger sister too. And obviously, in the African household, I wouldn't get into it, but like I had to look after them always. I'll just be there, just kind of looking after them. But yeah, very quickly we started playing video games and whatever. And I noticed even back then, they picked it up really quickly because I offered a challenge. Because I'd let them win when they were very young, but as they got older, I'd obviously try. And like, I remember this one game in particular, it was a Batman begins. It was like maybe it wasn't, maybe it was Justice League, whatever. But it was like a one-on-one fighting game. We would play it all the time, and I would always win. And then sometimes they would win also. Now if we play again, but it was like seeing that at them at that age, figure out the maneuvers of what I would be doing or how they would be doing, how they would play against each other, and how they were sore losers, and how they would be like, actually, I don't want to play you anymore. I want to play this other kid.
But that's what I want to know. Like, when you notice they're a sore loser, like, what did you do? And you said earlier, like, let me teach you what life is like. So I'm interested, especially with the African background as well. Like, if your sibling was a sore loser, did you talk to them about it?
Yeah.
Did you just keep pushing until they break? You know, like, I'm interested.
No, I mean, it's like, it's weird too, because I think you're very similar too, because I had this weird, like, recognition of myself at a young age. So even though I was, like, maybe, like, 5 years younger, older than them, maybe a bit more, I was still, like, maybe I was, like, 13 and 14. I recognized that in them at that age. I was like, if I let this kid just sulk all the time, he's not going to grow up to be a sore loser. He's going to grow up not to understand what life is like. So even through that, I would be like, okay, you've lost, but why did you lose? And okay, why did you feel bad about losing? You know, and they'll be like, oh, because I did it. I'm like, yeah, but okay, move that away. What is it about losing? It's like, maybe you're embarrassed about losing. Okay, get rid of that. If you get rid of the embarrassment about losing, all you're doing is just learning, and then you start to enjoy the game. So it's like that aspect of that where, like you were saying, is so important too, because that is life. Like, that's why I thought it was such a fascinating evolutionary trait that we've kind of developed, because these things, even I didn't realize, I was teaching them about life. I was teaching myself too, but I was teaching them about how to accept losses and, like, fears when you have difficulties and, like, all these things that come across. How do you look at these things? And if you look at them with, like, this, like, kind of, like, attitude of, oh, I can't believe this thing is in front of me, well, you never have the chance to grow. Never had the chance to actually look at it for what it is, which is an opportunity for you to grow. And yeah, it was fascinating for me too, as I got older and older, to see how they've developed as people now too, as kids. Because I talk to them like how I talk to you guys. Because I've always had that kind of, I like that kind of, like, ability. It was sometimes we go over their head. We're talking about Piaget.
Talking about Piaget, but I remember you were telling me in Africa, it's like kids are just adults but small. They're just small. It's not adults and kids, it's just small person
and big
person.
Literally, like, and it's even more pronounced in Africa, because, like, when I went back, you see them, because obviously it's not like they're here, we've got everyone goes to school. If you don't go to school, the government come to your house. There is the opposite. Like, no one cares if you go to school. You have to pay to go to school. So, like, most times the parents will have the kids working with them, and you see the kids just walking around as the parents is in mid traffic trying to sell food to this guy in the van. And it's like, really, you see the kids grow up very quickly because they're around adults. And even though, like, maybe it's a sad story because they didn't really have that kind of childhood, you know, maybe they have it within themselves, but these kids are really just small people, small adults, and they're just like, you know, they'll talk to you like they'll talk to you like they're your age, because they're so used to having that kind of development. And I think on both sides of it is interesting too, because at one point they do see life very early on, and I think I had that weirdly, because even I don't remember, I came in when I was 6, so obviously when I was back home, I was doing the same thing, walking around with my mum while she was selling stuff and stuff like that. So I just a vivid memory I have of that, of just being like on her back while she's selling stuff. And even though that's like kind of like gone from my kind of, you know, consciousness, I still have that lived experience, you know. And yeah, no, it's just fascinating to see that. It's fascinating to see how that pulls over to here, and seeing like how even my little brother and little sister, even though they're not in that environment, we still kind of teach them that same kind of routine.
Do you think in like that African, I'm only saying Africa a lot because obviously that is the only experience you have, and so like, well, not the only one, but as in terms of childhood, we've sort of spoken about games being a tool to teach those lessons. Do you think, I know it's video games specifically, and you said you grew up playing football. Do you think they can still learn those lessons of being a sore loser, or putting that aside and that quote-unquote humiliation to accept the game and accept the challenge? Like, are they still learning those lessons without video games, you know?
Yeah.
Like, is physical sports enough? Do they do it well enough, I guess?
I mean, it's difficult for me to say, to be fair. I think my brother and my sister at this age, well, my brother's a big gamer, so he still plays games with his friends, and I think the aspect of what I see is that he's now found a community, I guess. He's found a group of friends who love video games and they'll clown each other like how we did, and we were shouting at them, would be like, it's less about the, you know, evolutionary thing, more about like, you're an idiot, why did you do this? And that's part of it too, you know, he's learning.
Sure.
I heard that is crazy. But it's like, you know, and my sister's less gaming now, you know, she's kind of learning funnily enough, she's taken after my mother in just different ways, cooking and all that stuff, because that's just how it is. And I think so it is fascinating to see the development of these things. Even for me, speaking for myself, I don't know when I stopped learning, because I feel like at some point I stopped learning those skills and those traits, and I started adopting more British ways of development, more developing thinking about my emotion, I know
Thinking about your emotions.
thinking about my emotions. Yeah, I know.
British thing for you.
Yeah, to me, because back home that's not a thing. That's very much, and I know we spoke about this. The idea that recently I've been learning to actually feel my emotions and feel through them and understand them. And maybe that's not a British thing per se, but it's very much
Whatever your experience of it was.
Yeah,
it's anti-African.
It's anti-African for me, because growing up, it was almost bottle your emotion. It's almost like you live for the community. So whatever emotions that you have, you should be able to have that subservient to what the needs of the community is. And because we were not in that environment anymore, we're in this environment now, I'm having to wake up and look around and be like, actually, I have to think about myself, because actually this all comes from me. If I'm not feeling, even myself how I'm supposed to, or not understanding how I feel, being able to place feelings and emotions and descriptive of, okay, this feeling is this feeling is that, kind of pushing through the emotional Overton window almost, to have these emotions I can actually think about, that was a new process for me, and I'm still learning about that.
I'm gonna try to very roughly link this, but I think what I love, going back to video games, I think what I love about video games is those kind of life situations, at least on a fundamental level, the core emotions of those, the fear, the adrenaline, the anxiety. I feel games do a really good job at conveying those things. Not to say I could learn your upbringing through a game, but maybe, who knows. But the reason I wanted to go back to gaming is because I asked you about what you think is more important between narrative and gameplay. Thank you. And for me, I'm a bit of a purist in this sense, because for me, even when we're talking about things like learning lessons and chess just being this pure game, there's no story to it. You make the story, and that comes from a solid foundation of gameplay. And so I've always believed, and I always will believe, that unless you nail the gameplay, and there's this thing like a loop, what is the gameplay loop? What is the thing you do to get a favorable outcome? And then that will drive you to do the loop. And that's the loop, right? And that's what a game needs to have for me.
Why?
So because that's just if I want to watch if I want a story through and through, I'll watch a film. And also I know that those stories are probably better told anyway through film. However, I do agree that, through that kind of immersive experience of a game, and I'm not talking about VR or nothing, just literally being in this world, like you were saying before, that definitely does lend itself better to tell a story and make you feel really immersed in it, for sure. But at the same time, when I play a game, I just want a game. I want to be in a situation where there are mechanics baked in that if I want to do this thing, this needs to be done. When I get this thing, that happen, and then I need this thing. I need to do this to make it. Then I do it, and then that goes on to the next thing. And maybe that's not a loop per se, but those kind of mechanics are what I like, and what make a game for me. And I think playing games in my youth, core games, those are the kind of lessons I've learned, I suppose. And going back to perseverance, but also even things like critical thinking to a degree, it's even something like driving. I don't get scared when I drive. I'm a big man. No, I don't get scared when I drive. Of course I get anxious sometimes, but it's been drilled in me to almost in those physical situations where I need to be aware and I need to move and I need awareness. I just feel through the games that I've played as a child, I've just kind of developed that. And that's probably a hand-eye coordination thing, and maybe not necessarily talking about, like that loop I was talking about. But for me to get through the game and maybe learn those wider lessons of perseverance, I need a good loop to be there, and I've always said that.
I've got a question on that too. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think you're heading in this direction, which I really, really am interested in. I think that first thought that came to me when you said that was about how applicable those kind of skills that you've learned from gaming are to real life. And you mentioned driving, and I think that's so important. But also, like, that's by emotional, intelligence and emotional kind of controlling your emotion. I think we're kind of like talking about that topic, and I want to ask a question on that. So it was like, so how do you think, kind of not stepping away from gaming, but building on top of that, how do you think those kind of the traits have helped you on like figuring out how to handle struggle, figuring out how to, like emotionally deal with these challenges that, kind of, as we've said, games are like kind of evolutionary traits and like kind of map the world for us and all these things we develop on. But how has that helped you and for you?
I think off the bat, I just want to say it's not like I play games and I don't feel stress. Excuse me. It's not like I play games and I don't feel stress ever, or I don't know. I'm absolutely not saying that I'm perfect because I played games, but what I think games have kind of drilled into me, probably on a subconscious level, is a specific attitude that kind of just helps me to just move on with things, Not that can't be learned in other ways, but like I'm absolutely not saying you can only learn it through games, but personally, it's just baked in an attitude into me of that perseverance, which I even learned through my dissertation as well, of just continuously going through, always looking for another angle, always seeing if there is another way to do something, and not giving up, I suppose. And I think, when we talk about media that we've consumed, even things like anime, it has kind of given me positive outlook on life, I want to say, or hopeful, I suppose. Hopeful that I'll always be able to retry and do the level again.
Be the king of the pirates.
Be the king of the pirates eventually. But yeah, I feel those kind of attributes have lent, those attributes that I've learned almost through things I've consumed and things I've engaged with. Yeah, like definitely that kind of frustration and honestly it's a detriment sometimes, because there can be situations where the right option is to give up, and I don't mean give up like throw your dreams away. I mean like, this is a dead end, find another route. And maybe it's my own you could probably argue that a game should actually tell you literally that, but I think the way I've played, which is interesting in itself, even if that wasn't the intended experience, the way I've played is like, I won't use additional items sometimes, or very rarely I do, or I won't swap my powers and abilities around. I just get obsessed and I just keep hitting my head on this wall until I do it my way, and honestly I think that's an unhealthy thing. I don't think it's all positive and healthy sometimes, and I definitely think you can learn those kind of things. I do believe there is an element of like addiction to it, and we talk about perseverance, but maybe it doesn't necessarily make you persevere in something you actually don't give a shit about. And if anything, it's probably more like, I would rather be doing this thing instead, which just makes me procrastinate. Oh my god, which just makes me procrastinate even more.
Is your phone okay?
Yeah, I think so. Probably it dropped from.
Yeah, okay, cool.
How high did it go?
Yeah.
I didn't see it.
No, I didn't, but I just saw it boom.
Yeah, my god, how heavy is it? I lost my trail of thought, but yeah.
No, but basically you were talking about just like kind of like running into that wall, because that obviously those skills and those things help you, but
yeah, sometimes it's a detriment, for sure. I'm definitely not saying like it's all sunshine and rainbows or anything, but yeah.
Okay, here's a question then. Has because to be honest, I think like where I am currently in my life is that, like I've said, about finding this kind of like middle ground of emotions, and it's a lot of things about learning how to develop on that. Obviously like the first initial stage is like, cool, you learn how to figure out your emotions, but also how do you develop, how do you move on, what's the second order effect of these things, like letting go of stuff, mastering attachment, all these things. And for me, you were speaking about how you learn your kind of that development through gaming. For me, I learned it through like romantic comedies and like poetry and all these novels and literature, which shows you how to gain something, how to have that kind of connection to people, but not really the other side outside of it, you know. And so like it is a very new thing for me to have to learn traits and personality traits where it's like actually there is a boundaries and like having all these things and recognizing that within yourself, and like, you know, when you come against struggle, how do you face that? Because for me, similar to what you're saying, it's always like head on, like what is struggle, you know, I whatever, like I'll just power through, you know. But there is certain parts of life, and that comes in maturity, understanding how to really like maneuver through that, you know. So kind of the question I have for you, what to prioritize, exactly, yeah. So question I have for you is that what advice or what things have you learned from either anime or manga about, like, you know, figuring out, even gaming, about figuring out how to maybe go the other way, you know, maybe that is a dead end, actually, to figure out how to let go and, you know, move through that.